and welcome back to Disney Journey. I'm retired Imagineer Jim Shull, and today we start a series of journeys because we're going to be talking about the additional capacity program which occurred at Euro Disneyland, now known as Disneyland Paris. But in this set of journeys, I'm going to be talking about how, well, you can live in what feels like a jail cell, work next to an actual prison, and still develop and open a successful attraction. So on that note, let's get started. Our story begins with Michael Eisner deciding to build Euro Disneyland in Mondeville, France, home of birds and beets. Birds are good, and I like beets as well. But that's not real work. That actually had to start in Glendale, California, led by Tony Baxter. And him and his team developed Euro Disneyland. Some had their doubts, but Euro Disneyland, well, it quickly mobilized and was soon under construction. At one point, they said if you turned all of the construction cranes tip to tip, you could cross the entire park just walking across on them. Finally, one day, the day that we all wanted, came, and Euro Disneyland was done. Done and dusted, they used to say. And a very proud Michael Eisner stood at the gates to announce that Euro Disneyland was open to all. Euro Disneyland may have been opened, but it was far from being done, as we're about to see. Euro Disneyland was a very different Disneyland. It really drew on the very best of Anaheim, but reimagined it for another decade. And also a sensitivity to the European guest. I mean, after all, a lot of the stories that we found in Anaheim, well, they had their origins there in France and in Europe and in Germany and in Holland and in England. But the French loved the Old West. They loved to come to Thunder Mesa to ride the train, ride the steamship, even walk across the graveyard, where there was finally the actual haunted mansion that we first saw in Ken Anderson's drawings. The graveyard in Phantom Manor may not have been a listed attraction, but it was definitely a guest draw, and I'd say a guest satisfier. At least, I'd count myself as a guest. The version of Haunted Mansion there at Euro Disneyland, beyond being a dilapidated, truly haunted house, also featured a lot of little areas that people could go and explore. I mean, like the old graveyard, that if you took the path, would bring you right up here to the overlook of the geyser field. And beyond, well, you can see the train. And there on the river, well, if you turn your eye and wait for a while, you'd see the Molly Brown turning the corner. Yeah, it was a special place, and often when I was there on break, in years to come, I'd come and spend a lot of my time right in this spot. Nothing says Frontierland as much as a good haunted graveyard. We need to say farewell for now to these happy haunts and move on to the next chapter in our story. Let the record show that the history of Euro Disneyland was always one of controversy. And although controversial, Euro Disneyland did attract crowds. Euro Disneyland achieved its purpose, which is to be a European Disneyland. It was quickly evident as soon as that first summer that Euro Disneyland just didn't have enough to do. And so immediately in fact, work began on the additional capacity program. The additional capacity program, or ACP, well, that meant building things. And there are two ways to do it. One is a greenfield project. And like the name implies, you have a greenfield, you bring in the bulldozers and construction, and you start to build things. Like this, the Nautilus walkthrough. Or its next door neighbor, Euro Disneyland, later on Disneyland Paris's version of Space Mountain. And there we can see, well, the Orbitron, Videopolis, and Autopia. A greenfield project literally is as the name implies. It's a greenfield. There's nothing on it, nothing to tear down, just dirt. And the usefulness of it is that you can start to do things. Now, sometimes you're adapting, like with the old mill Ferris wheel. And sometimes, well, it expresses itself in a different way. For example, the transformation of Splash Mountain into Bayou Adventure. It's a perfect example of that. During ACP, several new attractions were the result of such remodels, like the castle walkthrough. There was always a castle, you just couldn't walk through it until ACP. It was during ACP that the castle's second floor opened to guests. When it opened, Euro Disneyland had train stations, but what they didn't have was a new train station that would be added in Discoveryland for ACP. But the ACP attraction that landed me working next to a jail and actually feeling like I was living in a jail was the Aladdin Walk through attraction, which I designed for Adventureland. Aladdin deserved an attraction because, after all, when the movie was released, it was a hit film right out of the gate. And suddenly, not just in the United States, but in Europe as well, Aladdin seemed to be everywhere. But now we wanted to make Aladdin permanent. So turning our eyes back to Paris, we started work. First thing is, well, Imagineers don't like to get wet. And if you want to stay dry, well, northern France is probably not the place you want to go. I mean, spring, summer, fall, pretty much any time of the day you could be greeted by a storm. In a word, well, France is wet. What can I say? But there's good news, because after it gets wet, well, it gets cold. I mean, really, really cold. As a lifelong Californian, I just wasn't used to seeing snow and ice and sleet and frozen hail. Part of me loved it. Part of me wondered, how do people live here? I mean, this was my view from my hotel room. Cold weather was reality, and the solution for Euro Disneyland was to create a set of covered arcades that went from the front to the back of the park. And that would allow, well, the Parisians to, well, be nice and dry and toasty no matter where they went. And the future home of Aladdin was part of the arcade system. But what we found out is it wasn't always used to the extent it might have been, which meant it was available real estate that we could take and seize to build the Aladdin Walk-through attraction. I mean, this Adventureland is very different, and it has a lot of covered walkways, and it's a very nice area, but you can't build the attraction in France. No, for that, we cast our eyes to London, England. And it was in London that I'd be spending the next 5 months of my life. When travel arrangements were made for my stay, they told me I'd be in a nice hotel. They didn't tell me the hotel was made out of concrete. And they didn't tell me that the vendor I'd be working with would give me this office. Note the jail cell bars. They have a reason. Because my next door neighbor was Brixton Prison. This is one of those times where literally, when I tell this Imagineering story, people say, "No way. No way." And I say, you can't make this stuff up. But the team was really good. A lot of them were sculptors from the Royal Academy, and their hands were, well, they were gold. And so working with them over the months, taking the drawings, I'd sketch and draw and set poses, work with them in the mechanical design, and we would create these beautifully sculpted figures. Because you see, my idea behind it was, for you who know the Disneyland Emporium windows, they're beautiful. And I thought, well, what if we, dialed that up to 11 and create something of that scale and level, but then really made it shine and made that as the basis of our Aladdin walkthrough attraction. The months rolled by, and finally, one day, the day we knew would come, we packed everything up into nice little crates, boarded the moving van, and headed on back to France. I was aboard the truck, but I got off at the Dover, let the truck move on its own accord, and finally, it ended up where it needed to go, which is there back on the site of Disneyland Paris, backstage, to start the installation for the Aladdin walkthrough attraction. There are phases to every project. And now I face probably the most dreaded one of all, because it's the one that proves whether I was right as a designer in my choices and decisions, or horribly, horribly wrong. Because honestly, every mile closer to the site is a mile away from the vendor who could correct my mistakes. But there we were, with the trucks, offloading everything that would become the Aladdin walkthrough attraction. There was no turning back now. Beyond the set pieces that we built in England, a lot of the props were actually rescue props. There were pots and ropes and shields and spheres that never got installed in the base park when it opened. And so, as I said to my friends, let's go rescue some of these and install them into Aladdin. Near the very end of the installation, one more thing had to be done. So I grabbed my paintbrushes and I painted the 2 murals. We had a front door mural and we had this one, the one that you see as you exit. And every time I'm back in France, I make a trip. So just like Dorian Gray, I can document the decades of my life. It was a great assignment. I've had so many of them. At the very end, the entire team received this as a gift. A set of pins in its own little box to celebrate the additional capacity program. And even now, looking back several decades, I really enjoyed the work there in Paris. And of all the projects, I gotta tell you that Aladdin has a special space in my heart. Well, with that, we end today's journey, but there'll be another one really soon. In the meantime, I'd like to invite you to like and subscribe to my channel, and also hit that bell icon. It's the one that'll let you know when the new episode is released. And honestly, there's so many Disney stories that I've been covering. It doesn't look like there's going to be any lack of stories coming your way in the near future. But on that note, for now, goodbye from Lost Canyon.